For today's project we're going to be painting this lovely little kitty cat, Poppadom, who sadly passed away recently. This is the photograph we're going to use for reference. Here I'm just sketching up, as you can see, super speed so that I don't bore you to death while I do the drawing. It's fairly basic, and we're going to tape it all up and also just rub it out slightly so we don't have lots of pencil marks. I use this nice fluffy brush to get rid of any eraser marks. Looking back at the actual picture of Poppadom, we can see that he's not a white cat. He's a kind of a what are called apricot, pale kind of strawberry blondie kind of colours. So that is the colour that I'm putting down as my first initial colour. I'm using watercolours here, so I've mixed up kind of a pale beigey browny apricot colour to use as the base colour for all over his body. With all watercolours, and even with any paint really, when you're starting off, you want to always work from light to dark. That way you don't put down a colour that you can't then manipulate. One of the things about putting down dark colour, particularly in watercolours, is that you can't really lighten up again because white watercolour is not going to do it. Even if you use gouache or acrylic or oil, once your dark colour is down, unless you actually wipe it off, it's almost impossible to try and then lighten it again. With gouache and not so much gouache maybe, but with acrylic and oil, you can of course add white, but then what it does is it just makes the colour kind of pastel-y and kind of washed out, and so therefore you lose any vibrancy in your colour. So you really always want to just start off with a nice pale light colour to get you going. Once we've got the pale colour down, we start to kind of add darker details. I've darkened up the mix of watercolour that I have, that I started off with using. I've just darkened it up a tiny little bit, probably with a little bit of burnt umber, which is the darker brown in my palette. You can probably see it just beneath the two blue colours. So there's two browns. Well, the one on the right hand side is the one that I'm using to darken because it's a slightly cooler brown rather than a warmer brown. So what I'm doing with the fur here, now fur is notoriously difficult to try and capture unless you are willing to put in a lot of hours and a lot of very, very minute detail to try and capture the fluffiness of fur. So what you want to try and do is just with a darker colour kind of hint at the kind of darker spots in his fur, where the kind of fur separates slightly so you can kind of see the kind of darker areas beneath. He's not a stripy cat, but these kind of marks kind of allow a sense of the density of the fur, kind of where the fur parts, and just gives you more of a kind of a texture to the fur. As you can see, that's it kind of drying off now, so it looks a little bit better. As with all watercolours, we go in and we'll add more detail as we go along. As I'm using the kind of the browns and the kind of these kind of darker tones, I'm going to go ahead and choose the other parts of my painting that require these kind of colour tones. This is kind of a plant pot that I'm just kind of doing a very, very basic colour tone because I don't want the plant pot to stick out too much. In terms of when you're choosing your colour tones for your painting, obviously you want a focus point, and we want the little kitty cat Poppadom to be the focus point. So we're using kind of pale browns here just to kind of mark out the plant pot and the stems of the leaves of this particular plant. Once we've done that, we're going back in and we're using again a little bit slightly darker watercolour to pick out some more detail in Poppadom. Then I've just chosen a very pale blue, so I've moved over from the browns now to blues, and so I'm choosing all of the blues that I want to kind of use in my painting, you know, going from light to dark again. This little Russian doll has quite a lot of dark blue in it, so I want to try and get that down so that when I go in later with some white detail, we've got a nice dark blue base to work from. Next we're going in and we're just adding all of our green elements, which would be obviously the plant leaves. In this instance I would have started a little bit lighter had I needed to, but with this particular plant It has a very kind of vibrant, deep green leaf anyway, so for it I'm going to choose this kind of mid-tone green. It's actually quite a nice kind of almost kind of a viridian green. It's got a really lovely kind of emeraldy colour to it, and it's in watercolour. It can be really, really vibrant, so I'm choosing that to start off with, and then we'll go in later and we will add some lighter green or kind of white elements and some very dark green elements just to give it some dimension. But the plant itself has a kind of a variegated leaf, so that means it goes from kind of a pale greens to dark greens throughout the actual leaf itself. And actually the watercolour, the way that watercolour kind of lays itself down on the paper, it kind of creates that variegation for you already. With the bigger plant on the right hand side, these leaves are a little bit more kind of sap green, so I've chosen a slightly different green to use on these particular leaves. When you're using a watercolour brush, if you use a round brush, the actual shape of the brush really helps you to kind of create the leaf shape. You kind of place the brush down and you just apply some pressure in the middle, and then you just pull the brush back off the paper, and it kind of gives you the kind of leaf shape. It's actually very, very satisfying to do. I managed to learn that doing a Skillshare class, and I thought it was really, really handy, because before I would have tried to paint all of the outsides of the leaves and then fill them in, but doing it that way is much, much better. Here I'm just adding some shadows to the doll, or I've added shadows to the doll into the plant pot, and now I'm going in with a darker green. I've just added a tiny little bit of dark blue and black to the green that I had already mixed up, just so that it's not like a very, very stark black, but it's got more kind of variety in the colour, and so it doesn't give you a harsh line. As you can see, you don't go and actually kind of outline all of the leaves again, you just kind of create small little bits and stripes, so you can kind of create some dimensionality in the actual leaves itself and in the pot. I'm also going to go back in and I'm going to create the darker shades around the base of the plant. Again, I've just done that with a dark brown, so you can see that there's some dimension in the base of the plant there. I had actually kind of skipped ahead slightly when I filmed this, so I had done some of the white detail on the Russian doll and on the plant pot. Here I'm using gouache, white gouache, to do that, because white watercolour just wouldn't show up in the dark at all, so gouache is a little bit more opaque, depending on the kind of thickness of it, so you can get some dimension by using a little bit of the white. It's not solid opaque like it would be if you were using acrylic. In this instance, it just gives you enough white to kind of create some lights and lights to contrast with the shadow or the dark elements of your plant pots and stuff. Once I've done that, I'm kind of going back in and just adding a little bit more dark detail again to Poppadom, just to his little butt area, and also in the crease of his neck, just to kind of give you the real sense of where his fur kind of separates. And just adding some tiny little bits of detail to the fur, just to give it more of a kind of a furry look to it. To finish off the drawing or the painting, I'm just adding some aquarelle pencil, just to give it some extra detail and extra kind of depth and contrast. I've used pencil and some white gel pen on the books on the left hand side as well, just to kind of give you a tiny little bit detail but not too much. I then finish off by removing all of the washi tape and making sure that my edges are nice and clean. I will then use an eraser just to get rid of any other pencil marks that I might have used when I was doing my initial drawing of the painting. So just clean up all of the edges and make sure everything's nice and tidy. And so that's our little painting of Poppadom. Although it's not identical to the photograph reference, I think it kind of captures his little personality perfectly. He was a super sweet and lovely little boy. He was very funny, and he'll be sadly missed. I hope his owner loves this painting.